for today's lecture. The Kerala Museum is a vibrant beacon of the arts set up in 1987. It was the brainchild of R. Madhavan Nair, who even then, 40 years ago, envisioned a space that would provide experiential learning for the city of Kochi. In 2022, to mark our 35th anniversary, the museum embarked on a flagship program in digital history, a kind of a new space that museums occupy today in the globe. The program is called the Journal Archives, and it aims to create engaging exhibitions on various themes of Kerala history, and you can browse it on our website, the slide that was playing just before this. The Journal Archive investigates, excavates Kerala history, micro-history, and we look at historical archives. We look at oral histories, drawing from the field, and supplementing what we find from the field with things that we have in the archives as well. The Journal Talks series is part of the public programming around Journal Digital Archives, and it builds on the museum's founder's vision to make history accessible to all. Today, in the 29th talk, we present the topic, The Evolution of Neo-Feudal Elements in the Agriculture of Kerala by P.K. Michael Tharakan. To introduce our speaker, really needs no introduction. P.K. Michael Tharakan is a senior academic, historian, and social science researcher. He is the chairperson of the Center for Socio-economic and Environmental Studies and has served in several senior academic positions, such as the chairman of the Kerala Council for Historical Research, professor at the Institute for Social and Economic Change, Bangalore, and Vice-Chancellor of Kannur University. Tharakan has authored many books and articles and is known for his work on documenting and analyzing the history of modern Kerala. Before the lecture, I want to remind you all to please turn your phones on silent. If there is something very pressing, please leave the hall and take the call, and you can return after you're done. The lecture will be for about 45 minutes or so, followed by what we wait for at every journal talk, a very active Q&A session. And we always say we'll take a maximum of 5 questions, and it always goes up to 8 or 10. So looking forward to that part. Now I would like to warmly welcome P.K. Michael Tharakan to the podium.
Atiti and friends, I'm extremely delighted to be present here on the invitation of the Kerala Museum. I'm not a stranger to this museum because I've been visiting this right from its beginning long years ago, and finding it a place, a welcome space where people who want to reflect on themselves, on their life and life around them could come and usefully spend. I'm also happy to be associated with this particular series of talks where I will get a chance, I hope, to share with all of you some kind of interpretations that I've been making on what is happening around us. Of course, when you start talking history, you tend to be interpretative because what you are saying need not be the truthful recreation of the period or the matter which you are dealing with. It could be very different from that, but nevertheless, a person's interpretation would help others also to interpret it in their own way. I mean, that is, I think, where the real basic historical exercises start. I am talking in English purely because it was announced that the language will be English. It need not be English alone. I can anytime switch to Malayalam too. And when you are talking about Kerala's agriculture situation and what has been happening there, it is easier, sometimes to talk in Malayalam. So I'm only saying that language should not be a bar at all. With these words of sort of introduction, let me go into the subject, the topic itself. I need not have to explain. Agriculture as an enterprise requires the following things. First of all, it requires land. Secondly, it requires capital. Thirdly, it requires entrepreneurship to organize everything. And fourthly, and most importantly, it requires labor. You look at any type of agriculture, even the most modern agriculture, green farming and all that, there also these four requirements are inevitable. Now, we are talking about the 19th and 20th century Kerala, when, as I would be claiming through in my presentation, a group of people representing Neo-Feudal. I mean, of course, I am sure that it's an unnecessarily heavy technical term which one has to use because of other reasons, but Neo-Feudal elements came into the agricultural enterprise. So to explain that, one has to look at these four requirements and how it came about to be made use of to create agriculture production. First of all, there is this question of land. And land in Kerala was a scarce element. Okay. It's scarce everywhere, but in Kerala particularly, because in addition to the physical problems of acquiring land, there was a sociological and structural problem in acquiring land, because land in Kerala, the whole land in Kerala, is believed to be owned by the Brahmin community alone. The Brahmins of the state owns the whole land. In fact, the Janmam, which is the highest form of land holding, is reserved for the Brahmins. Whether you may have disagreements on that and all that, but I'm saying that this is the general feeling, general belief. So you have to go either to the Brahmin or the people who are very close to the Brahmins. It may be high caste people or managers of the Brahmins to acquire land. And in the 19th century and even in the 20th century, the first half of the 20th century, people had to go to the Brahmins to get land. I'm talking Brahmins in a very loose. I'm talking about in the caste structure. There is the highest caste. They own the land, and they have to be a party to any agricultural enterprise that you are planning. Secondly, you need capital, because if you want to have even a very small bit cultivated, it requires some capital, either in the form of money or in other forms. And particularly if you are planning a larger enterprise, you require a little more. Now, whom do you turn for capital? You have to, of course, turn to the people with capital. And in the 19th and 20th century Kerala, the people with capital were also rare. There were, of course, number of traders, number of money lenders who, of course, had some accumulated money power, or also had access to some of the investments that goes into agriculture. It was mainly the traders, mainly the money lenders, traders kind of people to whom you turned for your capital. Then, of course, there was this third category of enterprise, entrepreneurial abilities. In the 19th and 20th century, there were people with entrepreneurial abilities, but they were not very visible in the circles which were available to consult if you are starting an agricultural enterprise. But there were some group of people who, with their acquired ability to organize, were always ready to help you to get every other elements together and invest in agriculture. Then comes the question of labor. Labor was the easiest. I'm talking the word easiest not in any derogatory term, not in any other. It was easy because labor cannot choose in the 19th and early 20th century. The laborers cannot choose what labor they would be doing because they are destined to do labor. And this was the strange effect of a socially accumulated kind of belief, kind of a sociological system, kind of a structural, socio-structural edifice in which physical labor, and that too of the hardest type of labor, hardest meaning people who have to work in mud and in water and in cultivating particularly paddy. That kind of effort has been done by less than or around 10% of the whole population. They did it for the rest of the people. This might sound very strange because I don't think world has its own slavery system all over the world, all over. They had all kinds of repressive kind of making people do work for them. But this was a very strange case in Kerala, where this 10% of the, I'm saying 10% meaning somewhere around that. In fact, there have been very interesting calculations done by modern economic historians. Some of them claim that it could be even as low as 7%. But whatever it is, that small group of people had to do everything. And nobody else, even today, if you count the number of people who are capable of working in the mud and in the water and slush, particularly to cultivate the staple grain of Malayalis, the rice, they come from one particular caste, which is the lowest caste in the caste hierarchy. So labor has got that kind of a nature, and they cannot choose. They are bought and sold. They are practically slaves, as we understand it, but slavery of a very different nature. It's not like the chattel slavery and other kinds of slavery that you find elsewhere, but slavery nevertheless. In fact, in 1854, the state of Travancore, or Tiruvidankor, abolished slavery. In 1855, and also there's another proclamation, I think is in 1853, I think, when Cochin banned slavery. And earlier than that, Malabar, the British were directly ruling the Malabar region. Malabar also abolished slavery. But there's been excellent investigations done by people like my friend Professor A.V. Jose, who has indicated instances of slavery being practiced up to 1930, which is very close to our times, up to 1930. But they were called Onapadikar. Different names were being called, but they were literally serving the functioning, serving as the supply of labor. So getting all these groups together was the challenge that the entrepreneurs had to have. The classic case is that of the Kayal krishi in Kuttanadu. Kuttanadu, that would be the ideal example. It's elsewhere too. But in Kayal krishi in Kuttanadu, it was an enterprise where you had to acquire, first of all, land from the Brahmin families or devasams from the temples, or from the Kovilagams, the princes and other such families, and aristocratic Nair families. So they are willing to rent it out. So you have to be to organize that first, and then you have to have capital. And for this whole enterprises, Kayal krishi enterprise in Kuttanadu, it was mainly one or two money lenders, mainly people generally known as Mangombil Pattas. They were Tamil Brahmins who had come all the way from Tamil Nadu to sell silk in Kerala. They settled down here, and they, of course, they had money. They were traders, they were money lenders, and they acquired a lot of credit-worthy possibilities, and they were willing to lend it for interest. Then, of course, the labor. Labor is something which is not, which can be moved from one person to the other. If you are a landlord and you have your own labor, you would not allow your people to move to another another owner. So that was the bottleneck when such enterprises arose in Kerala, when you had to have big regions being cultivated. And to cultivate those regions, you ought to have some people in addition to what you have at hand. So where do you go? So that was the requirement which forced the society to overlook the exigencies of the old system and introduce a freer movement of laborers so that people working in one place can also make their services available in another place. In economic history terms, it is a relatively freer kind of situation. Now, this movement came about. If you want to point out what exactly made this possible, you will be surprised to know that it was a technological innovation. That is, in Kuttanadu region particularly, the main requirement was to dewater, not to irrigate. Normally your agriculture requires irrigation, but here was the case where you had to dewater so that you can cultivate. So dewatering was done by all kinds of measures, and it was done by the lowest caste, who were the laborers, and laborers had to live on the Puramchira, that is the outer bunds, and where they had to meet all the fluctuations of the climate, floods and all that. Even now when there are, I'm working on, along with my colleagues, working on a documentation of the 2018 floods in Kerala, and it is very, very clear if you do a sample. It is the people from the same caste who are still facing this. And in fact, there is a study done by Professor Sanal Mohan and others, in which it's very, very clear. Things have not changed at all. I mean, they are the people who had to face the problems of whatever climatic changes that occurs in that region. So those people were tied to that, but then the entrepreneurs or the people who were running the agricultural enterprises found that there was a mechanical device available which will dewater, and they can pump out water, and of course it started with electric pumps, subsequently to diesel pumps, and now everywhere you have pumps dewatering for you. And they found it is better, it is cheaper to employ the mechanical power in addition to the labor, human power. So it doesn't mean that human power was abolished, but human power became supplementary to the one. So, but then for that you don't require people guarding your border throughout. Throughout the year you don't require people to stay in the border. So they were given the freedom to move about. You can work for more than one master, and for when it is harvesting, time of harvesting, everybody goes to everybody else's land, and so there is this was the beginning of of course this was a slight kind of freedom which was allowed to the lowest caste, but then it also becomes the breeding ground, I mean I'm putting the word in quotes, breeding ground of organized working class movements in Kuttanadu. In the 1930s, once they get out of this, they join trade unions and people like, some of them are still alive. V.S. Achyutanandan, who was the chief minister of the state, people like him found that this is a method of organizing the workers to stake their claim. Now, when you have this, and when you to get all these three other groups organized into an enterprise, you require, of course, entrepreneurship. And it was interesting that in Kuttanadu particularly, I'm talking about one narrow example. It need not be the case in other parts of the country, of the state. But in Kuttanadu, the people who were capable of entrepreneuring, of getting these people together, where they also belong to, again, a community. So you have a caste community combination all throughout. The caste community combination, which were important in this organization, were of course Christians called Syrian Christians, a particular kind of Christian group. They didn't own the land, they didn't own the capital, they didn't have any labor, but nevertheless they had the capacity to get everybody else together, and this story is very, very beautifully told by Thagazhi Shivashankarapilla in his famous novel Kayal, where he narrates how these things developed. And there are very interesting situations where these people become one of them succeeds in paying back the capital of the debt to the Mangombi Pattar. And Mangombi Pattar family is the same family from which M.S. Swaminathan comes, the leading agricultural scientist. So one of these Syrian Christians managed to pay the capital of the principal amount to the Pattar, and the Pattar is highly shocked. He says that don't break such a beautiful, such a divine relationship that we had for so many years. So you keep on paying me the interest, and we will. So this was the kind of a system from which people came about. Now, what I'm trying to explain is how did these group of people, of course I talked about Syrian Christians in Kuttanadu, it was not Syrian Christians in elsewhere, there were Ijava groups, there were Muslim groups. It is mainly Muslim, Ijava, Syrian Christians. These are the three. There are others too, but these are the three groups which emerged. They became very, very importantly active in the area of agricultural processing and agricultural work. All of a sudden, not all of a sudden, but throughout 19th and 20th century. Where did they come from? Where did they acquire this? Of course, in the caste structure, the Ijava's role was very ambiguous. They were considered to be a backward caste, of course, suffering from various caste positioning and all that. But nevertheless, they were not as badly deprived of freedoms of various types as the lowest caste. They were not Dalits, if you use a modern term. They were able to work in garden land. They were mainly working with coconut products, making coir, toddy, running toddy shops, and also they were in the general group of village laborers. I mean, they were working as carpenters and other. So they had a slight leverage vis-a-vis the Dalits, and from that group also you see some people emerging. Of course, from the Syrian Christians, central Kerala region, most of them come from the Syrian Christian region. And in Malabar region, it is mainly the Muslims. And also in Kuttanadu region and Kuttanadu district, it is mainly Rauters. They are also Muslim. So these groups emerge. I'll talk to you about a couple of examples, mainly from the central Kerala, that is the Cochin and Alleppey and its hinterland. What happens is that, I'm talking right now about the Syrian Christians. As I told you, the Syrian Christians, the very name itself sounds very, very weird in the sense that they are claiming to be Syrians. Then the question is that what are they doing in Kerala? So they must have had some access to the Kerala economy long ago. They claim to have been converted to Christianity by Saint Thomas, one of the apostles of Jesus Christ himself. That, of course, that kind of stories are held by every community. Whether it is true or not and all that we need not discuss. But they claim to be a very ancient group. But this ancient group had two very important advantages. One was that they were extremely useful for the upper caste to have around, because the lower caste, that is the lowest people, lowest caste group, they are the people who cultivate rice, and rice cultivation in the most muddy areas, most difficult areas, can be done only by them. Nobody else knows how to do that. So how can you eat that? By the caste rules, something which has been touched and created by the lowest caste cannot be eaten, cannot be touched by the upper caste. So you require somebody to mediate, and that mediation job was in central Kerala. What we find is that has been given to the Syrian Christians, mainly Syrian Christians, because there have been all kinds of reinterpretations of their role. And Kailasa Vastukal Ashuddhamayal, Paulosu Thottaladu Shuddhamagam. Paulos is the generic name for Christians. All that he has to do is that he touches what has been created by the lowest, and then he hands it over to the temples, to the Kovilagams, to the Devasams, to the Brahmasams and all that, and they can eat happily. So they became a kind of a mediating. Secondly, to have that kind of a position, they should be also be playing some role in the economy. And they played a major role. And my guess and my hypothesis is that they came to Kerala basically as traders. They must have been internationally known traders, because all over the world there was Syrian Christians were the major navigators, major eye doctors, major traders, and everywhere, including Genghis Khan's court in Mongolia. Syrian Christians are there, and they're all called Syrian Christians. They're Christians from Persia and Syria. So these people might have come also to Kerala, and they established here, and they became a major group of people who were in the trading community of the Kerala region. And Kerala has a very long coastal region, which is of course continuous with Konkan and also the Gujarat coast. So the whole west coast of India has got large number of traders. Large number of traders are required. And interestingly enough, you find all over the west coast, you don't have the Vaishya caste. And Vaishyas are considered to be the traders all over. Now you don't have the Vaishyas, and practically practically absent. So the Vaishya's role was taken over by various other groups, Parsis, Gujaratis themselves, some Gujarati community groups, Chettis from Tamil country, Yemeni Muslims, they were traders. So Muslims, Jews, Syrian Christians, all these groups from everywhere, they substituted Vaishyas all over the West Coast, and particularly in Kerala, they were, and they were dealing in the most precious thing that Kerala could offer. That was, of course, pepper, which is an agricultural product. And pepper, from time immemorial, was one of the products of Kerala which was very much needed for people from both from the west as well as from the east, that is from South China ports as well as the Middle Eastern ports. Westerners as well as Easterners wanted pepper, and Kerala geographically was in the center of the then navigational world. If you have a ship moving by the sea breeze, they will certainly cross each other in Kerala or in Sri Lanka. So Sri Lanka and Kerala has got the same advantage. So all that you have to do is that you start a shop, collect what comes from China, and keep it to be sold to the people from the Middle East, from Basra, from Red Sea ports and all that, and also wait for Chinese people to come, and you sell what you collect from the Westerners, and you can exchange. And Ashwin Dasgupta has done an excellent study about this. It's called it The Advantages of Exchange Trade. So, in addition to that, the traders in Kerala had a beautiful advantage. That is, they didn't have to invest in infrastructure. I am tempted to speak about it loudly, because even today to come here, I had to go through the national highway, which is dug up and which is being repaired for the last 1 year, and I think it will take another 2 years for them to. So you have roads are important today, but in those days roads were not important at all. You had this 44 rivers, almost all of them starting from the eastern hills, and joining the sea at the port, at the different ports in the west. So all you have to do is that pepper and other spices, timber, these are the these are the commodities which were very much needed. You just collect it and send it through the river. Of course, halfway through there may be problems in carting it, but you make whatever is required there and bring it in very quick time. The river itself will carry it, and so you have different port towns like Madai in the north, Talasheri, Kannur, Kozhikode, Kodungalur, Kochi, Purakkad, Alappuzha, Vizhinjam, Kollam, all over the, in fact, something like 40 to 49 ports have been identified on the coast of Kerala. And these ports, if you have control over those ports, you become a Raja, you become a kind of a king. So you have got, the Dutch, when they occupied Cochin, the commander appointed a committee to count the number of people wearing a crown in Kerala, and that committee counted for 1 or 2 days and stopped, because they already counted something like 300 people. So 300 kings were ruling this, or more than 300 people were ruling this small town, region of Kerala. So these people could become, local leaders, became kings and all that. So, and they profited from this trade. And the trading community didn't have to have any kind of heavy investment in infrastructural development because they had this river network in their favor. So the Syrian Christians in Kerala, it is Syrian Christians, Jews and Muslims, and of course Chettis and Gujaratis, and also Parsis. You got these are the groups which are very prominent among the traders. They handled a number of things like red silk. Red silk is one of the most important things that the hinterland Kerala required, because almost all our temple celebrations you have got red silk. Even our Velichapat's dresses a red silk cloth over his own clothes. So and kings and queens also used red silk, which is, of course, most of it came from China or from the eastern regions. So these things were handled by the traders, including the Syrian Christians. So the kings and notables in the hinterland required these people because they kept the trading mechanism running. So they were allowed to even supervise, go into the hills and supervise the Adivasi groups who were ultimately the owners of this kind of commodities, including even dried meat. Dried meat was part of the eating habits of Keralites, and also timber and other goods. So they not only went into the hinterland, they were allowed to have angadis and with a church. You see that all over Kerala you have got now new churches have come up, but I'm talking about the old churches. And in 1961, the Census of India has a village monograph in which they have tried to collect the legends about celebrations in these ancient places of worship, Hindu, Muslim and Christian. And the Christian churches, almost all of them in Kerala, were founded by Hindu notables. That's a very interesting thing. Hindu notables Hindu local leaders wanted Christians to settle down in their land because they are the people who will be bringing in oil, salt, and other kind of commodities. Salt is not made in the hinterland, only on the coastal region. So and that's why in the old legends, Uppukutan is used for both a Muslim character as well as a Christian character. So he brings and Chakundi. I belong to a family which is now considered to be fairly rich and all that. But in school, when I enter into a fight with another friend, he would call me a Chakundi, and I didn't understand what is a Chakundi. Later on, I found out that Syrian Christians are considered to be people who were using a chakka, a rotor. Manually, you use that to crush coconut as well as other oily substances and convert it into oil and sell it in the local market. So you were called Chakundis, and some Chakundis got rich subsequently, But what I'm trying to say that, these names are stuck, you got it in the past and it is still there. So these kinds of groups emerges all over Kerala. They spread all over Kerala. There is also no inter-community hostility, because if you have hostility, you cannot have any kind of transaction between the groups, and every group requires the other, because rice cultivation is done by somebody, commodities are brought by somebody, so you all depend. You are an interdependent kind of a communal this thing. So you have in Muchundi Mosque in Calicut in the 13th century, he is given all sorts of privileges by the Samudri, and in the modern town of Kollam or Koilon, there is again a number of privileges given to the Christian groups. So all these groups are become very, they have a non-hostile kind of relationship with each other. So these groups, the Syrian Christians, I'm talking about Syrian Christians alone, but the Syrian Christians, by virtue of this, became very, very important in the social structure, and they cannot be done away with, and they were nurtured and helped to make more money and all that. So they acquired enough capital to lend to the Rajas and the notables, because they were, there were other people who mainly belonged to the Hindu, again, in courts, in the Hindu group, who were rich and powerful. They used to spend money also quite profusely, and they require people to lend the money, but they don't go about asking for loans. What they do is that they will lease their land at the highest forms of tenancy. It's called Kanam tenancy. Kanam tenancy means you got the highest forms of tenancy, and the Syrian Christians were allowed at that level. But not Ijavas. Ijavas were still asked to work at the level of Verumpatam. But Ijavas also could at least come to the Verumpatam level by giving money in advance to the owners of land, and acquiring land for 12 years. Initially it was 12 years, subsequently it increased, and in 1865 they become permanent owners of the land that they acquire. So with this group becomes the major important group in society, and they started feeling that they can use their land for whatever purposes that they can use. Then they cultivate not only food grains, but they also cultivate cash crops. And in the cash crops, the first one that adopted, of course, was pepper, and secondly, coconut. Coconut becomes the major. So there are families known for their coconut holdings. There are families known for their pepper holdings. We have a person called Ittiyavira Nithiri, who by now we realize that he owned 1/4 of the whole Kottayam district in 1860s. To own 1/4 of a whole district is no joke. I mean, that kind of fortunes were made, because that fortune was made without any difficulty, because others also was involved in that. So these people became extremely, then of course they used to be in trading of timber, and timber was very much required particularly by the British, because they wanted it for their shipbuilding and other reasons. So there was this group of people at that level who became very rich. Then in 1902, the Britishers come with a magic crop, and that magic crop is called natural rubber. And natural rubber, it comes in 1902. By 1907, the Malayalam Manorama and its then newly young editor, Mama Mapla, he writes an editorial saying, Rubberilana Nammude Raksha. You know, normally Christians talk about Raksha or in terms of going to heaven through certain prayers and other. But he says that Nammude Raksha Rubberilana, rubber krishi. And a person called Karippaparambil Chakochan, who got a first class in his SSLC, is sent by the Karshaka Sangham of Kanjirapalli to Sri Lanka, where he learns the secret, because the Britishers were not willing to tell the Indians how to grow rubber and all that. So he learned it from a British plantation there, and he becomes a consultant, and he advises people to how to grow rubber. And rubber and pepper becomes the hallmark of a new group of people who made immense amount of, I'm not saying the whole community made the money, but certain people. Following them was the Ijava community, and there was great landowners like Alumutul Channar. Alumutul Channar in 1911 paid the largest amount of land tax to the Thiruvidankar government. These people, because the Ijavas also had an advantage in terms of coconut products, having been very much wanted in the world market, especially the American market. They wanted coir carpets, oil and coir and other, and also this newly found wealth developed the habit of toddy drinking. So toddy shops also became very profitable, and a whole community of Ijavas came to the forefront, followed of course by the Muslims also. That each story can be so they found that why should we be second class citizens to the Nayars and the Nambudiris, who are the highest caste. We have got more money to buy them out, and we are paying more tax to the government, so we should be considered equal to them. So they formed their own, meaning the richer people among them. They always had a religious person as the leader, supported by one of their own rich persons, and each community developed its own socio-religious reform movements, and they started talking about human rights, about civil rights, mainly about civil rights, subsequently to also political rights. And in 1930s, they formed the State Congress movement in Thiruvidankar, shortly followed by Kochi Prajamandalam. And of course in Malabar there was this national movement. So there is this emergence of these three communities, and their idea is to get to the place, get to the position that the higher caste had. And the way out to get to that position was of course through modern education, because if you have educated in the modern way, you are likely to get jobs as wakils and tahsildars and village clerks in British companies and all that. And there, caste doesn't matter that much. Caste at the middle level. The lower caste still suffered, and lower caste story is yet another story which requires a different kind of an interpretation. So, but the middle caste could come up to the higher caste in terms of their sense of equality, and this they won through several and it also resulted in the 1956-57 elections when the communist ministry was formed, probably one of the earliest incidents of a communist coming to power in a competitive democratic setup. But they were backed by the three major slogans. One was land reforms, because they all wanted land. And secondly, they wanted democratization of education, because education cannot be held by a group alone. It should be out to everybody. And thirdly, they wanted a market for the whole of Kerala, and so they wanted Thiruvidampur, Kochi and Malabar formed into one market, and they succeeded in that also. So you have the modern Kerala, which of course some people now call the Renaissance in Kerala and all that, whatever terms that you use. But the emergence of this group, since there is no other name that can be given, I think the historians call it Neo-Feudal, because they are still feudal, but they are not exactly the kind of feudal people as the Nambudiris and Nayars were, who had a different kind of birthright associated with their caste position. Now there's something different had emerged. So this is the part of the story that I have to tell you. I will be happy to receive your comments, your questions, etc. You can show them. Yeah.
Before we go on to the Q&A, there are a couple of visuals that we have to complement the talk. So we'll take you through those as well, and Tharakan sir will also speak a little bit about those.
Yeah, this is the emergence of the plantations, because it started with missionaries were the first people to initiate the plantation. This is a Basil mission in Malabar region, Manadawadi in Wayanad. This is Nilambur rubber estates, which is one of the earliest big rubber estates, and the share again. This is of course an access to the Nilambur rubber estate. This is of course Munnar with the church building that, but of course Munnar is known as the plantation area. Again, tea plantation. You know, in Munnar had a railway, as you know well. It got washed away during the 1924 floods. No, sorting coffee beans in Bangalore, of course. again, washing coffee. There's again Travancore wood and metal works, because in the plantations requires these kinds of industrial work, and planters themselves start these kinds of industrial. And Syrian Christian subsequently becomes the owners of the Tikoi rubbers, which is now on. You see the names itself. Indian names are there. Thomas Kayal Kalam, G. Joseph, Rahu Bahadur, Gopal Lamenon, Khan Bahadur, Adam Haji. These are the new directors.
We'll now take some questions. If there's anyone who would like to ask a question, please raise your hand and I will pass the mic to you. Those of you who've been here at Janal before, you may please also connect it to other lectures that you've listened to.
Yeah. And now to address you, but Professor Tharakan, this thing about the absence of Vaishyas on the West Coast, it's quite, intriguing. Why were they displaced by?
You see, the fourfold caste system need not have been existing as such anywhere in India. It could have been a kind of a generic kind of terminology, that there are four castes, because everywhere you find different kinds of arrangements. But what is interesting is that the whole West Coast, of course, East Coast also had a number of trading centers. There were 5 major trading centers. One was, of course, Bengal. The other was Coromandel, both in the east, and Malabar, Konkan, and Gujarat, and the 3 on the West Coast. But West Coast was more heavily visited by number of ships coming from the Middle East. Not only from the Middle East, but also from port to port there was. In fact, Indian navigation was limited to costing the hug kind of technology. They never ventured into the open sea. And that is why they could not, even with a big alliance, they could not defeat the Portuguese when they came. So in the West Coast, what you find is that all over the West Coast, including in Gujarat, you do not have the Vaishya caste very prominently. There are some groups, but not very prominently, but the Vaishya's role is taken over by different groups including Zoroastrians, the Parsis, Yemeni Muslims, Kachi Memons, Syrian Christians, Jews. Jews are everywhere. Everywhere, right from Gujarat onwards to Kerala. Then you have Muslims, different types of Muslim groups. There are 8 different Muslim groups identified in Kerala coast. So you have this kind of people being the substitutes for a monolithic Vaishya caste. So the Syrian Christians are very much in that group. And being part of that means that they had a very vital role in the running of the economy. And that led them to having a great important role in the agriculture-based operations too. In Kerala, which was basically an agricultural region, both cash crops as well as grains. And in both, they could play a major role. That's what I'm trying to say.
Mr. Tharakan, that was a brilliant talk with a lot of research and homework, I think. I think you played down that feudalism, the evolution of feudalism in the last 2 centuries. I think there was feudalism, and that was one of the reasons why communism took its ground in Kerala, in particular Malabar and Alapi. In Malabar, you remember that Kanachira Mathai murder by the Naxalites. And in Vayalar, there was an attempt for a bloody revolution, attacking the police station, etc. I think, and I just was browsing internet, and I found that George Thomas was the biggest landowner in Kerala until recently. George Thomas Kottugapalli.
Yes.
He was the biggest landowner in Kerala. He had quite a great deal of surplus land. And so many people, as you said, Maman Mapla wrote an editorial saying that it is in rubber that there is our salvation. So the same thing was called upon by Srinarayana Guru, and Neo-Feudals and Christians did progress as a result of this kind of slogans. Anyway, what I feel is that there was some feudalism, there was slavery. You said that even though slavery was abolished many decades ago, there was really slavery at the ground level, and in many plantations people were, so many low-caste people were working without any wages or at very meager wages in many cases. So there was, I think, feudalism. You had a neutral outlook towards it. I understand that. You do not want to create any, you do not want to provoke. I appreciate that, but I think there was feudalism, and that is the reason why there was the mushrooming of communism here. And I remember that Murikan was a great entrepreneur. He did that farming very skillfully, and after nationalization of that land, even once our government, the communist government, could do the cultivation there. So that kind of good people were there, and hardworking people were there, but there was a feudalistic aspect, dimension in those creeds.
Yeah, thank you for your compliments. I'm also, I don't disagree with you. It was a feudal, that's why I said, the new group which emerged to replace to some extent the old feudal lords, that is the Brahmins, Kovilagam, people from different Kovilagams, aristocratic Nair families and all that, were replaced to some extent by Syrian Christians, Iyavas, and also Muslims. So these 3 groups were, up to that point, were considered to be at the middle level, not at the top. And feudalism is a hierarchical thing, just as caste is. Caste is also a hierarchical thing. So the hierarchy still remained, but people got replaced, and so there was some tussle between, say, for instance, the Nair group, for instance, in the 1930s. You have got bitter articles being written by Nairs against Christians, Christians writing against the Nairs, because in 1924, the Nair community, for the first time, acquired the right to divide their joint family holdings by Tawaris. So Tawaris got divided, And what happened next was, Taveri land was being sold, and that money was being used for, for different purposes. And who bought this land? This land was bought by Christians. And Professor T.C. Varghese, he has got an excellent book on agrarian change in Kerala. He has given tables after tables showing that the shift of land from Nayars to Christians. So I'm only saying that the Christians were not exactly the feudal lords, in the sense that, they were not like the old Nambudiris and Nayars. And Syrian Christians were known for their hard work. I mean, there were people who were very, very, they work very hard and all that. But they are for money. They are out to sell, whatever, at whatever price, good price that they can earn, they are prepared to sell. But what I'm trying to say is that they use this new opportunity to consolidate their power, and consolidating their power by further belittling the people, so-called people who are below them, the caste hierarchy. So they do not let the Dalits free. In fact, even now, some of the Christian churches are having problems between Dalit Christians and Syrian Christians. They're still struggling, fighting with. That's a hangover from the old feudal past. So feudalism is still there, but feudalism with a difference. And with that difference, I thought Neo-Feudalism, though I'm myself not very happy with the word, but this is which has been used by my senior colleagues like Professor Kayal and Kurup and others. They use the word Neo-Feudal. So Neo-Feudalism is what is now reigning.
You said there was a rift between Nayars and Christians.
Yes.
I was wondering that must be the reason why Kuttanadu was writing so many novels, in which a Christian girl is being
Yes.
loved by
Yeah.
a Nayar boy.
Yeah.
And it was fast marriage.
സർ എക്സലൻറ്റ് പ്രസൻറ്റേഷൻ. എൻ്റെ ചോദ്യം കുറച്ച് ഔട്ട് ഓഫ് സിലബസ് ആണ്, എന്നാലും പറയുകയാണ്. ഇപ്പോൾ പൊതുവെ ഒരു ഐഡിയ എന്ന് വെച്ച് കഴിഞ്ഞാൽ മലയാളികൾ ധാരാളം മദ്യപിക്കും എന്നുള്ളൊരു ഐഡിയ ഉണ്ട്. മലയാളികൾ ധാരാളം മദ്യപിക്കാറുണ്ട്, അതെ, ആ ഒരു ഐഡിയ ഉണ്ട്. അപ്പോൾ അത് എങ്ങനെ ഈ ലേബർ മൂവ്മെൻറ്റായിട്ട് ടൈപ്പ് ചെയ്യാൻ സാധിക്കും? കാരണം പൊതുവെ യൂറോപ്പിലൊക്കെ ഈ എടുത്തു നോക്കുമ്പോഴേക്കും ഈ മദ്യം എന്നുള്ളൊരു സാധനം അത് ഈ ലേബറിനെ ഒന്ന് സപ്രസ് ചെയ്യാൻ വേണ്ടി ഫ്യൂഡൽ ലോഡ്സ് യൂസ് ചെയ്തുകൊണ്ടിരിക്കുന്ന സാധനങ്ങളാണ്. അപ്പം കേരളത്തിൽ ഈ ഒരു ഐഡിയ എങ്ങനെ നമുക്ക് ലിങ്ക് ചെയ്യാൻ സാധിക്കും? എന്താണ് ഈ സ്റ്റീരിയോ ടൈപ്പും ഇതെല്ലാം കൂടെ ഉൾപ്പെടുത്തി?
It's a very interesting question, and there are friends of mine who are working on this, more or less this issue of mainly toddy drinking and labor. But you should also remember that because we also inherited the caste system, in fact, Kerala's main problem is that, or India's main problem is that everything boils down to caste and caste structure. So the caste structure means that making of toddy and selling of toddy and all that belongs to a certain group of people alone, not to anybody, not to anybody else, not even people who are below them, or even to people who are above them. So it is for Iravas in central Kerala, Tiyas in northern Kerala, Nadas in southern Kerala. So they are the people who are. So their elite among them, or the people who are getting some or other richer and all that, they, when they go into enterprises, one of the main choices that they have is to start a toddy shop. And toddy shop has its own, Dilip Menon, my friend, has got an excellent paper on the habits to be followed in a toddy shop, where to sit. There's been places earmarked. The Nair landlord gets a stool kind of, തെങ്ങിൻ്റെ കട ചെത്തി വൃത്തിയാക്കി അതിലാണ് നായർ ലാൻഡ് ഇരിക്കുക. നായർ ലാൻഡ് പാളയ്ക്കകത്ത് കള്ള് കൊണ്ടുവന്ന് കൊടുക്കും. കള്ള് സെർവ് ചെയ്യേണ്ടത് ഈഴവ കമ്മ്യൂണിറ്റി മാത്രം, ഈഴവ കമ്മ്യൂണിറ്റിയിലെ സ്ത്രീകളാണ്. പിന്നെ ഈഴവർക്ക് ഈ നായർ ലോഡിരിക്കുന്നതിൻ്റെ അടുത്ത് തന്നെ നിലത്ത് കുത്തിയിരിക്കാം. ദളിത് വിഭാഗത്തിൽപ്പെട്ടവർക്കും കള്ള് കൊടുക്കും. പക്ഷെ അവർക്കൊരു ഡിസ്റ്റൻസിൽ പുറത്ത് വെയിറ്റ് ചെയ്യണം. അവർക്ക് ഇല സ്വന്തമായിട്ട് കൊണ്ടുവരുന്ന ഇലയിൽ കുമ്പിള് കൂട്ടി അതിൽ കുടിക്കാം. സോ all your actions, even your actions are controlled by the caste rank. ഇതിനകത്ത് ക്രിസ്ത്യൻസും മുസ്ലിംസും ഒന്നും വരുന്നില്ല, but the other groups. So when you have such structured situation, who can benefit from this? If there are more people coming and buying liquor, സാധാരണ നാട്ടിലെ ഒരു നായർ ഭൂവുടമേ ഉണ്ടാവുള്ളൂ, അയാൾക്കാണ് ഈ സ്ഥാനം. പക്ഷേ തൊട്ടടുത്തുള്ള ഭൂവുടമകൾക്കും ഒക്കെ വന്ന് കള്ളു കുടിക്കണമെന്ന് തോന്നി തുടങ്ങിയ, കള്ളുകുടി എന്ന് പറയുന്നത് ഒരു എൻ്റർടൈൻമെൻറ്റായിട്ട്, ആളുകളുടെ ഒരു റിലാക്സേഷനായിട്ട് മാറിക്കഴിയുമ്പോൾ ഈ കള്ള് ഒരു ഉൽപ്പന്നമാണല്ലോ. ഇത് ഇങ്ങനെ ഉൽപ്പാദിപ്പിക്കുകയും അത് കൂടുതൽ ഉൽപ്പാദിപ്പിക്കുകയും അത് കുറേ കഴിഞ്ഞപ്പോൾ ട്രേഡ് യൂണിയനിസമൊക്കെ വന്ന് അതിൻ്റെ ഇന്നിപ്പോൾ നമുക്കറിയാമല്ലോ, ഓരോ തെങ്ങിനും ഇത്ര ഫീസ് വരെയുണ്ട്. അപ്പോൾ ഇങ്ങനെയുള്ള ഇതൊക്കെ വരുമ്പോൾ ഇതിൻ്റെ ബെനഫിറ്റ്, ഇമ്മീഡിയറ്റ് ബെനഫിറ്റ് ഈ ഈഴവ കമ്മ്യൂണിറ്റിക്ക് തന്നെ കിട്ടുക. അതുകൊണ്ട് അവരിൽ നിന്നുമാണ് ഒരു ഗ്രൂപ്പ് ഓഫ് എലീറ്റ് ഓണേഴ്സ് കമ്മം. പക്ഷേ അതെന്താ ഉണ്ടാകുന്നത് വെച്ചാൽ, ഈ കണ്ണൂരിനെ കുറിച്ച് ഞാൻ പ്രത്യേകം പറയണ്ടല്ലോ. കണ്ണൂരിനെ കുറിച്ച് ഞാനവിടെ കുറച്ചാൾ വർക്ക് ചെയ്യുന്ന ആളാണ്. ഈ കണ്ണൂർ പറഞ്ഞാൽ ഒരു അടിപിടിയുടെയും അക്രമത്തിൻ്റെയും ഒരു സ്ഥാനം ആയിട്ടാണ് പലരും കണ്ടുപിടി. പക്ഷേ കണ്ണൂരെ സാധാരണക്കാരായ കണ്ണൂരുകാർക്ക് ജോലി കിട്ടണമെങ്കിൽ എന്താ ചെയ്യുക? ഇപ്പോഴത്തെ സ്ഥിതി ഞാനീ പറയുന്നു. ജോലി കിട്ടണമെന്നുണ്ടെങ്കിൽ അവർക്കൊന്നെങ്കിലും ഹയർ എഡ്യൂക്കേഷന് പോകണം. മിക്കവാറും കണ്ണൂർ യൂണിവേഴ്സിറ്റിയിൽ പോകും പഠിക്കാനായിട്ട്. കണ്ണൂർ യൂണിവേഴ്സിറ്റിയിൽ കണ്ണൂർ ഉണ്ട്, കാസർഗോഡുണ്ട്, വയനാടിൻ്റെ ഒരു ഭാഗമാണ്. ഇവിടുത്തെ കോളേജുകൾ കേരളത്തിലെ കോളേജുകളുമായിട്ട് യാതൊരു വിധത്തിലും കമ്പയർ ചെയ്യാൻ പറ്റില്ല. പല വിധത്തിൽ ഉള്ള ബുദ്ധിമുട്ടുകൾ സഹിച്ചിട്ടുള്ള കോളേജുകളാണ്. അവിടെ പഠിക്കുന്നവർക്ക് നന്നായിട്ട് ഇംഗ്ലീഷ് പറയാനറിഞ്ഞുകൂടാ, ഇൻ്റർവ്യൂവിന് പോയാൽ അങ്ങനെ. അതുകൊണ്ട് തന്നെ അവർക്കൊരു ഡിസഡ്വാൻറ്റേജ് ഉണ്ട്. പിന്നെ അവർക്ക് കിട്ടാവുന്ന ലോക്കൽ ജോലികളാണ്. ഈ ലോക്കൽ ജോലി കിട്ടുന്നതിന് വേണ്ടിയിട്ട് ഇവർ പുറത്തിറങ്ങി ശ്രമിച്ചാൽ അവിടുത്തെ ഏറ്റവും പ്രധാനപ്പെട്ട ഒരു ഇത് ക്യാഷ് ക്രോപ്സാണ്. പ്രത്യേകിച്ച് റബ്ബർ, തെങ്ങ്, കുറേ പ്ലാന്റേഷൻസും ഉണ്ട്. ഇത് മുഴുവൻ ഞാൻ പറഞ്ഞത് 100% എന്നല്ല, ഒരു 80% എങ്കിലും ഓൺ ചെയ്യുന്നത് കണ്ണൂരുകാരല്ലാത്ത തെക്കൻ തിരുവിതാംകൂറിൽ നിന്നും സെൻട്രൽ തിരുവിതാംകൂറിൽ നിന്നും മൈഗ്രേറ്റ് ചെയ്ത ക്രിസ്ത്യാനികളാണ്. അതും സുറിയാനി ക്രിസ്ത്യാനികളാണ്. അപ്പോൾ അവരുടെ സഹായം വേണം ഈ കണ്ണൂരുകാർക്ക് ഈ പ്ലാന്റേഷൻസിൽ എന്തെങ്കിലും ജോലി കിട്ടണമെങ്കിൽ. പിന്നെ അത് വിട്ടാൽ പിന്നെയുള്ളത് എന്താ ഉള്ളത്? പിന്നെയുള്ളത് കള്ള് കച്ചവടമാണ്. കള്ള് കച്ചവടവും അപ് ടു 1960-65 വരെ തിയാസായിരുന്നു കൺട്രോൾ ചെയ്യുന്നത്. ഇപ്പോൾ തിയാസ് അല്ല. ഇപ്പോൾ തിയാസും സിറിയൻ ക്രിസ്ത്യൻസും തമ്മിലാണ് കോമ്പറ്റീഷൻ. Can you imagine, the Syrian Christians had moved into this, and something like 60-40 എന്ന് ചിലർ പറയുന്നു. കൃത്യമായിട്ട് കണ്ടുപിടിക്കാൻ പറ്റില്ല, അത് സർവേ ഒന്നും നടക്കുന്ന ഫീൽഡല്ലല്ലോ. ചിലർ പറയുന്നു 50-50 ആണെന്ന് പറയുന്നു. എന്തായാലും അവിടെയും പിന്നെയുള്ളത് ബിസിനസ് എന്ന് ആളുകൾ പറയാം. ബിസിനസ് എന്ന് പറഞ്ഞാൽ ഈ എവറി 20 കിലോമീറ്റേഴ്സ് അവിടെ ഒരു ടൗണുണ്ട്. ഇതെങ്ങനെ 20 കിലോമീറ്റർ ആകുമ്പോൾ ഒരു ടൗൺ ഉണ്ടാകുന്നു എന്നുള്ളതിനെക്കുറിച്ച് ഇൻവെസ്റ്റിഗേറ്റ് ചെയ്ത് വന്നപ്പോൾ ചരിത്രകാരന്മാർ കണ്ടുപിടിച്ച ഒരു സംഗതി, ടിപ്പു സുൽത്താൻ്റെ ആർമി ഒരു ദിവസം മാർച്ച് ചെയ്യുന്ന ദൂരമാണ് 20 കിലോമീറ്റർ. 20 കിലോമീറ്റർ കഴിയുമ്പോൾ അവർ സ്റ്റോപ്പ് ചെയ്യും. അവർ സ്റ്റോപ്പ് ചെയ്ത ഓരോ സ്ഥലവും ഒരു പാളയമായി, ഒരു കച്ചവട സ്ഥലമായി, അത് പിൽക്കാലത്ത് ടൗണുകളായി. അപ്പം എവറി 20 കിലോമീറ്റേഴ്സ് യു ഹാവ് എ ടൗൺ. ഈ ടൗണിൽ ധാരാളം എല്ലാ അർബൻ സെൻറ്റേഴ്സിലെയും പോലെ സാധനങ്ങൾ വിൽക്കുകയും അത് മുഴുവൻ ഡോമിനേറ്റ് ചെയ്യുന്നത് മുസ്ലിം കമ്മ്യൂണിറ്റിയാണ്. അത് തന്നെ ദേ ഹാവ് ബിക്കം വെരി സ്ട്രോങ് നൗ in terms of migration and foreign remittance. So I'm talking about the ordinary youngsters, young boys and girls whom I, as the Vice-Chancellor of the university, had to teach. I literally had sleepless nights thinking about their future because they are absolutely no-go. No. They're very much stuck in this highly, എന്താ പറയേണ്ട ഒരു പ്രത്യേകതര, അതിൽ നിന്നും വിമോചനത്തിൻ്റെ വാക്കൊക്കെ പറയുന്ന രാഷ്ട്രീയ പ്രസ്ഥാനങ്ങളോടൊക്കെ താല്പര്യം ഉണ്ടാകാം. അതുകൊണ്ട് എല്ലാത്തരം രാഷ്ട്രീയ പ്രസ്ഥാനങ്ങൾക്കും അവിടെ വേരോട്ടമുണ്ട് താനും. പക്ഷെ ഞാൻ പറയുന്നത്, ഈ നമ്മുടെ മുമ്പിൽ കാണുന്ന പല കാര്യങ്ങളെയും ഡീപ്പറായിട്ട് അനലൈസ് ചെയ്ത് വരുമ്പോൾ ഇങ്ങനെയുള്ള ചില ചോദ്യങ്ങളെങ്കിലും ഉന്നയിക്കുന്നുണ്ട്. എന്തായാലും നിങ്ങളുടെ ചോദ്യം വളരെ ഇമ്പോർട്ടൻ്റ് ആണ്. ഇറ്റ് ഷുഡ് ബി വർക്ക്ഡ് ഓൺ. താങ്ക് യു.
Any other questions?
In the beginning you said the Brahmin community owned the entire agricultural land.
Yeah.
Why? What was the reason for that? One particular community cornered the entire agricultural land. Was other communities were not interested or not? That is one question. Second question, you talked about that Manorama Maman Mapla. He was selling rubber on Raksha. Was he not misquoting? I think so, because he was selling because of that MRF factory.
No, there was no MRF then.
Rubber factory.
അല്ല, അന്ന് MRF ഒന്നും ഇല്ല. അന്ന് MRF ഒന്നും ഇല്ല. മാമൻ മാപ്പിള മരിച്ചു കഴിഞ്ഞിട്ടാണ്.
Okay, that group has got, no?
No, that has nothing to do with that.
That has nothing to do with that.
ഇല്ല.
Because okay. Because even pepper, spices, rice, they were also more important now in Kerala. So see, you are telling that Maman Mapala was not there at that time, or his rubber factory was not there at that time. Correct, no?
No,
Okay.
he didn't have any rubber factory at all. പക്ഷേ he knew that rubber is a commodity which is going to be very, very important in the economy of Kerala, primarily because rubber has got an advantage. It need not be cultivated like other plantation crops. You don't have to have a big estate. 100 ഏക്കറോളം ഉള്ള ഇതിനെ ആണ് നമ്മൾ എസ്റ്റേറ്റ്സ് എന്ന് അന്ന് വിളിച്ചിരുന്നത്. 100 ഏക്കറിൽ കുറവാണെങ്കിൽ അതിനെ ഹോൾഡിങ്സ് എന്നാണ്, റബ്ബർ ഹോൾഡിങ്സ് എന്നാണ് വിളിച്ചിരിക്കുന്നത്. 1923 ആയപ്പോഴേക്കും ഈ ഹോൾഡിങ്സ് മിക്കവാറും ഈ സിറിയൻ ക്രിസ്ത്യാനികളൊക്കെയാണ് ഹോൾഡ് ചെയ്തത്. അവരുടെ സ്റ്റാറ്റിസ്റ്റിക്സ് നമ്മൾ പരിശോധിച്ച് കഴിഞ്ഞാൽ പ്ലാന്റേഷൻ സെക്ടറിനേക്കാൾ 1 ഡിഗ്രി എങ്കിലും കൂടുതൽ പ്രൊഡക്ടിവിറ്റി ഈ ഹോൾഡിംഗ് സെക്ടറിലായിരുന്നു. അതായത് ചെറിയ സ്ഥലങ്ങളിൽ പോലും ഇൻറ്റൻസീവ് ആൻഡ് എക്സ്റ്റെൻസീവ് കൾട്ടിവേഷൻ എന്ന് പറയുന്ന ഇതുണ്ടല്ലോ. എക്സ്റ്റെൻസീവ് കൾട്ടിവേഷൻ വലിയ എസ്റ്റേറ്റുകൾ, ഇൻറ്റൻസീവ് എന്ന് പറഞ്ഞാൽ ചെറിയ ഏരിയയിൽ. ഈ ചെറിയ ഏരിയയിൽ ഭയങ്കര ഇൻറ്റൻസീവായിട്ട് കൾട്ടിവേറ്റ് ചെയ്യാൻ പറ്റുന്ന ക്രോപ്പുകളായിരുന്നു തെങ്ങും റബ്ബറും. ഈ തെങ്ങും റബ്ബറുമാണ് ഈ പറഞ്ഞ എല്ലാ കമ്മ്യൂണിറ്റീസും, സുറിയാനി ക്രിസ്ത്യാനികളായാലും ഈഴവരായാലും മുസ്ലിംസ് ആയാലും അവർ. പിന്നെ ബ്രാഹ്മണരുടെ ഓണർഷിപ്പിനെ കുറിച്ച് അക്കാലത്ത് നമ്മളാരും ഇല്ലായിരുന്നത് കൊണ്ട് അതിനെക്കുറിച്ച് വ്യക്തമായിട്ട് ഒന്നും പറയാനില്ല. പക്ഷേ ഞാൻ പറഞ്ഞൊരു വിശ്വാസം അതാണ്, അവർക്കാണ് പരശുരാമൻ ഈ മഴുവെറിഞ്ഞ് കേരളം സൃഷ്ടിച്ച് അവർക്ക് ഏൽപ്പിച്ചു കൊടുത്ത ഭൂമിയാണ്. അതുകൊണ്ടാണ് ഈ ഭൂമി മുഴുവൻ അവരുടേതാണ് എന്നൊരു വിശ്വാസം നമ്മുടെ കേരളത്തിൽ വളരെ ശക്തമായത്. മറ്റുള്ള കമ്മ്യൂണിറ്റി എന്തുകൊണ്ട് പരശുരാമൻ്റെ അടുത്ത് പോയില്ല, എന്തുകൊണ്ട് ചോദിച്ചില്ല എന്ന്. പിന്നെ നമ്മുടെ ഭൂമിയെക്കുറിച്ചൊക്കെ ഒത്തിരി കോൺസെപ്റ്റുകളുണ്ട്. അതായത് ഭൂമിയുടെ ഈ ഏക്കർ സെൻറ്റ് ഒക്കെ വെച്ചിട്ട് അളക്കുന്ന സിറ്റുവേഷനൊക്കെ പിൽക്കാലത്തുണ്ടായതാണ്. അന്നത്തെ കാലത്ത് അങ്ങനെ അളക്കാനൊന്നും വലിയ മെത്തേഡൊന്നുമില്ല. രാശി വെച്ചിട്ടാണ് ഭൂമി നിശ്ചയിക്കുക. നിങ്ങളുടെ ഭൂമി നോക്കിയിട്ട് ഇതിന് നല്ല രാശിയുണ്ട്, ഇതിനൊരു 10 രാശി. അപ്പോൾ 10 രാശി എന്ന് പറഞ്ഞാൽ അതൊരു മിത്തിക്കൽ കോയിനാണ്. അതായത് സ്വർണത്തിൻ്റെ ഒരു കോയിൻ ഉണ്ടെന്നും ആ കോയിൻ പരശുരാമൻ പുഷ്പക വിമാനത്തിലിരുന്ന് നാട്ടിലേക്ക് ഇങ്ങനെ എറിഞ്ഞു കൊടുത്തു. അത് ചില ഭൂമിയിൽ കൂടുതൽ വീണു, അതിന് കൂടുതൽ പ്രൊഡക്ടിവിറ്റി ഉണ്ടാകും. പ്രൊഡക്ടിവിറ്റിയെ ബേസ് ചെയ്തിട്ടുള്ള ഒരു ഗ്രഡേഷനാണ്. അപ്പം ഇങ്ങനെയുള്ള കാലത്തെക്കുറിച്ചാണ് നമ്മൾ ഇങ്ങനത്തെ മെമ്മറീസിൻ്റെ ബേസിസിൽ കാര്യങ്ങൾ തീരുമാനിച്ചിരുന്നതിനെക്കുറിച്ചാണ് നമ്മൾ സംസാരിച്ചത്.
ഓക്കെ, താങ്ക് യു.
ഹലോ, താങ്ക് യു പ്രൊഫസർ തരകൻ. എൻ്റെ ക്വസ്റ്റ്യൻ എന്താണെന്ന് വെച്ചാൽ, നമ്മളിപ്പം നിയോ-ഫ്യൂഡൽ എലമെൻറ്റ്സ് പറയുന്നുണ്ടല്ലോ. ഹലോ, കേൾക്കാമോ? നമ്മൾ നിയോ-ഫ്യൂഡൽ എലമെൻറ്റ്സ് എന്ന് പറയുന്നുണ്ടല്ലോ. അപ്പം കേരളത്തിൽ നല്ല രീതിയിൽ ലാൻഡ് റീഡിസ്ട്രിബ്യൂഷൻ നടന്നതിന് ശേഷം കണ്ടംപററി ടൈംസിൽ ലാൻഡുമായിട്ടുള്ള റിലേഷൻ എങ്ങനെ മനസ്സിലാക്കാൻ പറ്റുക? അഗ്രികൾച്ചറും കുറച്ച് വൈഡാണ്, എന്നാലും സിമ്പിളായിട്ട്.
ഈ ഭൂപരിഷ്കരണം വന്നത് ഈ പറയുന്ന ഈ നമ്മൾ പിന്നെ EMS നമ്പൂതിരിപ്പാട് മുഖ്യമന്ത്രിയായിരുന്ന ഗവൺമെൻറ് ആണല്ലോ ആദ്യം അഗ്രേറിയൻ റിലേഷൻസ് ബില്ല് എന്ന് പറഞ്ഞ ഒരു ബില്ല് കൊണ്ടുവന്നു. അത് പല പ്രാവശ്യം അത് നടപ്പിലാക്കാൻ ശ്രമിച്ചെങ്കിലും അത് സാധിച്ചില്ല. 1963 വേറൊരു നിയമം കൊണ്ടുവന്നു. ആ നിയമത്തിലൊരു അമെൻമെൻറ്റ് വരുത്തിയിട്ട് 1970 നമ്മൾ ഒരു ബില്ല് അഗ്രേറിയൻ റിലേഷൻസ് ബില്ല് കൊണ്ടുവന്നു. ഈ ബില്ല് വന്നതോടുകൂടി കേരളത്തിലെ ഈ ഭൂ ഉടമസ്ഥാവകാശം ന്യായയുക്തമായ രീതിയിൽ വിതരണം ചെയ്തോ ഇല്ലയോ എന്നാണ് ചോദ്യം എന്നുണ്ടെങ്കിൽ അന്നും ന്യായയുക്തമായിട്ടുള്ള വിതരണം നടന്നിട്ടില്ല. പക്ഷെ അവിടെ ഉണ്ടായത് എന്താണെന്ന് വെച്ചാൽ അന്നത്തെ ഭൂമിയുടെ ഓണർഷിപ്പ് ഞാൻ പറഞ്ഞതുപോലെയുള്ള ഇതിനു മുമ്പുള്ള ചില ഐതിഹ്യങ്ങളുടെയും ഒക്കെ അടിസ്ഥാനത്തിൽ ചിലരുടെ കൈവശമായിരുന്ന ഭൂമി, ആ ഭൂമിയുടെ മേൽ ഒരു നിയന്ത്രണം കൊണ്ടുവന്നു. 15 ഏക്കറിൽ കൂടുതൽ ഒരാൾക്കും പറ്റില്ല, ഒരാൾക്ക് 15 ഏക്കറിൽ കൂടുതൽ പറ്റില്ല. അപ്പോൾ വലിയ വൻകിട ജന്മിമാർ, ഉദാഹരണത്തിന് നമ്മുടെ കൊച്ചിൻ യൂണിവേഴ്സിറ്റി വൈസ് ചാൻസലർ ആയിരിക്കുന്ന പ്രൊഫസർ ശങ്കരൻ്റെ കുടുംബത്തിന് 26 ഗ്രാമങ്ങൾ, 26 ഏക്കറെന്നല്ല പറയാം, 26 ഗ്രാമങ്ങളുണ്ടായിരുന്നെന്നാണ് പറയുക. അപ്പോൾ 26 ഗ്രാമങ്ങളുണ്ടായിരുന്ന അവർക്ക് പോലും ഓരോ അഡൾട്ടിന് മാക്സിമം 15 ഏക്കർ ഭൂമി, 15 ഏക്കറിന് മുകളിലോട്ടുള്ള ഭൂമി ആ ദിവസം ഗവൺമെൻറ്റിൽ ഇൻവെസ്റ്റഡ്, ഗവൺമെൻറ്റിൻ്റെ കയ്യിലാവും. ഗവൺമെൻറ്റിൻ്റെ കയ്യിലാകുന്ന ആ ഭൂമിക്കാണ് മിച്ചഭൂമി എന്ന് നമ്മൾ പറയുക. ആ ഭൂമിക്ക് ആവശ്യമുള്ള മറ്റുള്ളവർക്ക് വിതരണം ചെയ്യാനൊരു സിസ്റ്റം അവരുണ്ടാക്കി. അതിന് വളരെ എലാബറേറ്റായിട്ട് പിന്നെ ലാൻഡ് ട്രിബ്യൂണലും ലാൻഡ് ബോർഡും ഒക്കെ ഉണ്ടാക്കി. ആ വിതരണം ശരിയായിട്ട് നടന്നോ ഇല്ലയോ എന്നൊക്കെയുള്ള സംശയങ്ങളൊക്കെ ഉണ്ട്. പക്ഷേ എങ്കിൽ തന്നെയും അത് കുറേ വിതരണം ചെയ്തു. മറ്റൊന്ന്, ഇപ്പം ഞാനൊരു കുടിയാനവനാണ്. ഞാൻ നിങ്ങളുടെ കുടിയാൻ, നിങ്ങൾ ഒരു ഉടമയാണ്. അപ്പോൾ എനിക്ക് നിങ്ങളിൽ നിന്നും കിട്ടിയ ഭൂമി, അതിൻ്റെ മുഴുവൻ ഓണർഷിപ്പ് എനിക്ക് ട്രാൻസ്ഫർ ചെയ്ത് കിട്ടും. പക്ഷേ എനിക്ക് ട്രാൻസ്ഫർ ചെയ്ത് കിട്ടുന്നതും 15 ഏക്കറിൽ കൂടുതലാണെങ്കിൽ, 15 ഏക്കറിൽ കൂടുതലാണെങ്കിൽ അത് ഗവൺമെൻറ്റിന് പോകും. 15 ഏക്കറിൽ എത്ര കൂടുതലുണ്ടോ അത് പോകും. പക്ഷേ ആ 15 ഏക്കർ എനിക്ക് കിട്ടും. അത് പിന്നെ കുട്ടികൾക്ക് വേറെ എമൗണ്ട് കൊടുക്കാനൊക്കെയുള്ള പ്രൊവിഷൻസ് ഉണ്ട്. അപ്പം ഇങ്ങനെയുള്ളൊരു ഡിസ്ട്രിബ്യൂഷനാണ് ചെയ്തത്. പക്ഷേ ഇതുകൊണ്ട് ബെനഫിറ്റ് ചെയ്തത് കുടിയാനവന്മാർക്ക് മാത്രമാണ്. അതായത് കുടിയാനവന്മാരെന്ന് പറഞ്ഞാൽ മറ്റൊരാളുടെ ഭൂമി എടുത്ത് കൃഷി ചെയ്യുന്നവരെയാണ് കർഷകരായി കണ്ടത്. അതിന് താഴെ കർഷക തൊഴിലാളികൾ എന്ന് പറഞ്ഞൊരു ഗ്രൂപ്പുണ്ടായിരുന്നു. കർഷക തൊഴിലാളികൾക്ക് ആകെപ്പാടെ ഗവൺമെൻറ്റിന് കൊടുക്കാൻ പറ്റിയത് അന്നത്തെ സ്ഥിതിക്ക് 10 സെൻറ്റ് സ്ഥലം. 10 സെൻറ്റ് സ്ഥലം, 10 സെൻറ്റ് എന്ന് പറഞ്ഞാൽ ഒരു ഏക്കറിൻ്റെ 10-1. ആ 10 സെൻറ്റ് സ്ഥലം അവർക്ക് ഓണർഷിപ്പായിട്ട് കിട്ടി. എന്ന് മാത്രമല്ല, അവിടെ നിന്നും അവരെ ഇറക്കി വിടാൻ മുതലാളിമാർക്ക് ഇല്ലെങ്കിൽ ഓണേഴ്സിന് സാധ്യം അല്ലാത്ത വിധത്തിൽ റൂളുണ്ടാക്കി. അത് 1947 വരെ റെട്രോസ്പെക്റ്റീവായിട്ട് അതിന് അവകാശം കൊടുക്കുകയും ചെയ്തു. 47 മുതൽ ഇങ്ങോട്ട് ആരെയെങ്കിലും മാറ്റിയിട്ടുണ്ടെങ്കിൽ അവരെ തിരികെ കൊണ്ടുവന്ന് അവിടെ സ്ഥാപിക്കണം. പക്ഷേ ഈ 10 സെൻറ്റ് കിട്ടിയവർക്ക് അതൊരു നല്ല, അവർ പലരും വളരെ സന്തോഷിച്ചു. അത് ആ 10 സെൻറ്റിൽ നിന്നും അവർക്ക് ബിൽഡപ്പ് ചെയ്യാം എന്നൊക്കെ വിശ്വസിച്ചു. പക്ഷേ 10 സെൻറ്റ് കിട്ടിയത് കൊണ്ട് എന്താ ഉണ്ടായത്? അവരെ പിന്നെ പണ്ടത്തെ ആളുകൾ, പണ്ടത്തെ മുതലാളിമാർ ഈ പാവപ്പെട്ടവരെ വന്ന് ചോദിക്കുക, എനിക്ക് കിടക്കാൻ ഇടമില്ല, എന്നാൽ നീ എൻ്റെ പറമ്പിൻ്റെ അവിടെ ഒരു കുടിൽ വെച്ച് താമസിച്ചോളാൻ പറയും. അങ്ങനെ ഫ്രീ ആയിട്ട് എന്നുവെച്ചാൽ അവരെ കൊണ്ട് ജോലി ചെയ്യിപ്പിക്കാമല്ലോ. അവരെ കൊണ്ട് ജോലിക്ക് ആവശ്യമുള്ള ആൾക്കാർ വരുമ്പോൾ അവരെ കൊണ്ട് ജോലി ചെയ്യിപ്പിക്കാം, പിന്നെ കുറഞ്ഞ കൂലിക്ക് ജോലിക്ക് എടുക്കാം. അതിനൊക്കെ ഉള്ള പ്രൊവിഷൻസ് ഉണ്ടായിരുന്നു. പക്ഷേ ഇനിയിപ്പോൾ ആരും കൊടുക്കില്ല. കൊടുത്താൽ അവൻ കുറച്ച് കഴിയുമ്പോൾ 10 സെൻറ്റ് ചോദിക്കും. 10 സെൻറ്റ് ചോദിച്ചാൽ കൊടുക്കാതിരിക്കാൻ പറ്റില്ല. അതുകൊണ്ട് ഈ ഗിഫ്റ്റ് ചെയ്യുന്ന ആ മെത്തേഡ് ഇല്ലാതായി. പിന്നെ ഉണ്ടായിരുന്നത് വിലയ്ക്ക് മേടിക്കുക എന്നുള്ളത്. ഈ 10 സെൻറ്റുകാരന് വിലയ്ക്ക് മേടിക്കാനുള്ള സ്കോപ്പ് അന്നുമില്ല. അപ്പോൾ എന്തു ചെയ്യും? അവൻ്റെ ജീവിതത്തിൽ കുറച്ച് കഴിയുമ്പോൾ അവന് 2-3 മക്കൾ ഉണ്ടായി. ആ മക്കൾ കുറച്ചുകൂടി കഴിയുമ്പോൾ അവർക്ക് മക്കളുണ്ടാകും. ഇവർക്കൊക്കെ കൊടുക്കാനായിട്ടുള്ളത് ഈ 10 സെൻറ്റ് മാത്രമാണ്. അപ്പോൾ ഈ 10 സെൻറ്റ് സ്ഥലം അവർ പലർക്കും ഇത് വിറ്റ് അവരെന്ത് ചെയ്യും? ഈ 10 സെൻറ്റ് വിൽക്കാൻ മേലെന്നൊക്കെ ആദ്യം നിയമം ഉണ്ടായിരുന്നു. ആദ്യത്തെ 15 കൊല്ലത്തേക്ക് വിൽക്കാൻ മേലാത്ത നിയമമൊക്കെ ഉണ്ടായിരുന്നെങ്കിലും ആളുകൾ അത് വിറ്റ് അവസാനം ഭൂമി ഇല്ലാത്തവരായി മാറുക. അതായത് ഈ 10 സെൻറ്റുകാരായിട്ടുള്ള ഈ അഗ്രികൾച്ചർ ലേബറേഴ്സ് എന്ന് പറയുന്ന കൂട്ടരുണ്ടല്ലോ, അവരെക്കുറിച്ചാണ് നമ്മൾ പറഞ്ഞു തുടങ്ങിയത്. അതായത് കേരളത്തിൻ്റെ കാർഷിക പ്രവൃത്തിയുടെ 100% തന്നെ ചെയ്തിരുന്നത് 10% താഴെയുള്ള ആൾക്കാരായിരുന്നു. ആ 10% താഴെയുള്ള ആൾക്കാർക്ക് അവർക്ക് പ്രതീക്ഷിച്ച രീതിയിലുള്ള ഒരു മേൽഗതി ഉണ്ടായിട്ടില്ല ഈ ഭൂപരിഷ്കരണം കൊണ്ടും എന്നുള്ളതാണ് എൻ്റെ. അതുകൊണ്ട് ഞാൻ അല്പം ഒന്ന് ഒരു അഹന്ത പറയുകയാണെങ്കിൽ, എൻ്റെ ഒരു പേപ്പർ ജസ്റ്റിസ് സുകുമാരൻ്റെ ഒരു ജഡ്ജ്മെൻറ്റിൽ കേരള ഹൈക്കോടതി അവരുടെ ജഡ്ജ്മെൻറ്റിൻ്റെ ഭാഗം ആക്കിയിട്ടുണ്ട് ഞാൻ എഴുതിയ ഒരു ലേഖനം. അത് ഞാൻ ആർഗ്യൂ ചെയ്യുന്ന കാര്യം ഇതാണ്, ഈ പോയിൻ്റാണ്. താങ്ക് യു.
Any other questions?
Marsha, just a sort of contemplation on the idea of using Neo-Feudal. I was largely looking into the works of Paul Sweezy and Maurice Dobb, the transition from feudalism to capitalism. So if there was a transition from a very agrarian-centric capital to a cash crop-centric capital, which is pepper and rubber and all that. So can't we actually say that we have surpassed the times of feudalism, where actually the primitive accumulation or the capital flight itself has reached almost in its zeniths? So wasn't it more of a birth of capitalism than a movement towards a neo-feudalism? That's my question.
That's a very legitimate doubt. You see, this is a book which I've had the fortune to write with the leading economist, Professor K.N. Raj. So K.N. Raj talked about this situation as commercialization of the economy. So he didn't call it capitalism, because capitalism has its own rigid rules and regulations, which is yet to come into Kerala. It is not feudalism either, or the classical. So classical feudalism do not exist in Kerala, because it is it's basically a European concept, you know. But something like feudalism was existing in Kerala, based upon caste and social hierarchies and all that. So that kind of feudalism has been questioned, it has been challenged during the late 19th and early 20th centuries. And something else has been created. But that is where the new name becomes important. Is it something which is leading to capitalism? It may be. On the other hand, Professor Raj thought that this commercialization of the economy is not exactly capitalism, but it will remain like that for a long time, unless there is a thorough reworking of the system from within. And that is yet to come. At that time, he talked about it in the 1970s and the early 1980s. And my feeling is that we are still at that. It would have also changed, because what has happened was that, as I was telling earlier, by 1956, the Communist Party of India, then it was a united party. Later on it became split into CPI, CPM and all. They came to power. Even they themselves were surprised, because they didn't expect to win. But they won the election, because the people very much wanted their slogans like United Kerala, democratization of education, and land reforms. These three were accepted. But then that government performed fairly well. Of course, they could survive only for 2 years or slightly more than 2 years. But then, they were dismissed from power, though they had the majority in the assembly, which is, of course, an undemocratic action, but they lost power. They not only lost power, they were not allowed to come back to power for nearly a decade. And during that time, the party itself split into two. So they started fighting each other, and they had all kinds of problems. They finally came to realize that they are likely to be kept out of power forever unless they do something drastic. So they made up with each other. They formed a coalition with 7 parties, including the Muslim League. And Muslim League had very clear-cut policies against land reforms and other kind of progressive, so-called progressive. So what it meant was the Communist Party itself had to backtrack on some of their. So their idea was they followed the pattern set by the non-communist opposition. They had a coalition, and these people also formed a coalition. So you ended up with a UDF and an LDF. And ever since that, until now when Pinarayi Vijayan managed to get elected twice, until now, it was 5 years one party, 5 years the other party. What both of them could do was that the communists cannot talk about a progressive legislation like the land reforms. All that they could speak of was competitive welfareism, because the communists say, the Congress say that, or UDF says that, we will provide 1 kilo of rice for 2 rupees. And what the communists would say is that we will provide you with a kilo of rice for 1 rupee. Or, so you keep on competing on bidding for the, so welfareism became the standard. So that kind of exchange of ruling right, of course, ceased this time. Whether the government will be able to continue it further, I don't know. But what I'm trying to say is that up to now, they have been working on this. So from the commercialization, whether it will go to either real capitalism or even can also proceed to socialism, you can, at least as a mythical kind of concept. Socialism is also lurking around.
Thank you, sir. We'll take one last question before, I think there are more questions, but we'll follow this question with a formal thank you and then continue with other questions, okay?
Thank you. നമ്മൾ ഈ 15 ഏക്കർ സീലിംഗ് വന്നില്ലേ, അപ്പോൾ എന്തുകൊണ്ടാണ് ഈ പ്ലാന്റേഷൻ സെക്ടറിനെ എക്സെപ്റ്റ് ചെയ്തതിൻ്റെ റിയൽ പ്ലോസിബിൾ റീസൺ? കാരണം ഈ ഫ്രാഗ്മെൻറ്റേഷൻ ഒഴിവാക്കുകയാണെങ്കിൽ ഇത് സെയിം വുഡ് ഹാവ് ബീൻ അപ്ലിക്കബിൾ ടു paddy fields as well as coconut gardens as well. എന്തായിരിക്കണം? Conspiracy theories apart.
That is a പലരും ചോദിച്ചിട്ടുള്ള ചോദ്യമാണ് ഇതിനു മുമ്പ്. ഈ പ്ലാന്റേഷനിലും ഡിവൈഡ് ചെയ്തിട്ട് ചെറിയ പ്ലാന്റേഷൻ ഗ്രൂപ്പുകളാക്കി എന്നിട്ട് അതിനെ കോപ്പറേറ്റീവൈസ് ചെയ്യുക എന്നുള്ള ഒരു പദ്ധതിയുടെ അടിസ്ഥാനത്തിലാണ് കമ്മ്യൂണിസ്റ്റ് പാർട്ടി ആദ്യത്തെ നിയമം കൊണ്ടുവന്നത്. പക്ഷേ ആ നിയമം കൊണ്ടുവന്നപ്പോൾ പ്ലാന്റേഷൻ സെക്ടറിനെ ഗവേൺ ചെയ്യുന്ന 1-2 നിയമങ്ങൾ സെൻട്രൽ ഗവൺമെൻറ് നിയമങ്ങളായിരുന്നു. നമുക്ക് സെൻട്രൽ ഗവൺമെൻറ്റിൻ്റെ റൂൾസും ഉണ്ട്, സ്റ്റേറ്റ് ഗവൺമെൻറ്റിൻ്റെ റൂൾസും ഉണ്ട്, കൺകറൻറ്റ് റൂൾസും ഉണ്ട്. അതിൽ സെൻട്രൽ ഗവൺമെൻറ്റിൻ്റെ റൂൾ അനുസരിച്ച് 10 വർക്കേഴ്സിൽ കുറവ് വർക്ക് ചെയ്യുന്ന ഒരു സെക്ടറിനെ പ്ലാന്റേഷനായിട്ട് റെക്കഗ്നൈസ് ചെയ്യാൻ പറ്റില്ല. അപ്പോൾ ഡിവൈഡ് ചെയ്ത് വരുമ്പോൾ ചില പ്ലാന്റേഷൻസിൽ 10 പേരിൽ പോലും കുറഞ്ഞു പോകും ആൾക്ക്. അപ്പോൾ അതിന് പ്ലാന്റേഷൻ സെക്ടറിന് കിട്ടുന്ന ഫേവേഴ്സ് ഒന്നും കൊടുക്കാൻ പറ്റില്ല. അതുകൊണ്ട് അത് ടച്ച് ചെയ്തുകൂടാ. പിന്നെ അത് മാത്രമല്ല, അന്നത്തെ വിമോചന സമരം മുതലായിട്ടുള്ള കാര്യങ്ങളൊക്കെ ഉണ്ടല്ലോ, അതിനൊക്കെ പ്രധാന ഒരു സ്ലോഗൻ ഈ പ്ലാന്റേഷൻസ് ഇവരേറ്റെടുക്കും, കമ്മ്യൂണിസ്റ്റുകാർ ഏറ്റെടുക്കും. അപ്പോൾ നെഹ്റു ഗവൺമെൻറ് ടോൾഡ് EMS ദാറ്റ് യു കനോട്ട് ടച്ച് പ്ലാന്റേഷൻ. അതുകൊണ്ടാണ് അവർ വിഡ്രോ ചെയ്തത് എന്നാണ് ശ്രീമതി KR ഗൗരിയമ്മ ഞങ്ങൾ when I interviewed her, she herself has told me, and I think that may be the truth. Yeah.
You want to take that one? Okay, one last. Sir, this is the last. After that, we'll close formally and close our YouTube live, and then you can continue discussion.
This is a very small question. It's not a question, in fact. There was a question that was asked about the SUSI-DOP transition discussion. But there, SUSI talked about long-distance trade and trading capital eventually turning to industrial capital. That did not happen in Kerala.
Yeah.
And SUSI, Morris Dobb was talking about the relatively better off tenants buying land in the rural areas, and eventually they became richer and richer and started buying land. Then the laborers were released from agriculture, or the feudal tenants or feudal workers were released from agriculture and they migrated into the cities, into the manufactories,
Yeah.
and started working there. And there, one important thing which Dobb mentions is that productivity in agriculture has increased.
Yes.
All over the world where capitalism developed, productivity in agriculture has increased, and at a point in time, the agricultural productivity was larger than industrial productivity.
Industrial.
In that sense, more capital could be accumulated and that could be passed on to the industrial sector. In Russia, this was tried
Yes.
in a different way by Preobrazhensky's thesis, primitive capitalist accumulation.
Yeah.
So that accumulation forcibly was brought in during Stalin's time, and they tried to build the industrial capital, which could not succeed.
Yeah, I should tell everybody that, I'm talking to a doyen in this area, Professor Sukumar Nair. Of course, your question requires much serious answering. The main point I would like to raise is that commercialization of the economy, the agrarian economy, led to, as it has happened in Lenin's work, he talks about Soviet area, the middle peasants will wither away. Some of them manages to become rich and become big plantation owners and all that. Some of them go down and they lose their land. And people who lose their land will be forced to sell their lands to those who are your neighbor who is richer. And therefore there would be accumulation at one hand, and the larger number of people would have remained same. But what you see in Kerala and central Kerala is that during the 1930s and the 1940s, this seems to have happened. This seems to have started happening. But again, to me, the caste community fixation is very much important. The Syrian Christian community realized that they would soon lose their land because they were shifting over to commodities like rubber and also other kind of cash crops. But the prices were fluctuating and therefore they were not able to hold on to that. So what they realized was that soon they will be driven to landlessness. And landlessness in an agrarian society like Kerala was the greatest of humiliation that a farmer can have. You will be considered equivalent to a Dalit who is an agricultural laborer who will have to seek, even for his survival, work with somebody else. And that too, with your own neighbors, your own neighboring farmers who have done well, they would be the people who can give you jobs. But then they realized at that time, and in this, their community and their religion plays a role, in the sense that many priests and others of the community knew what was happening in Malabar. In Malabar region, there was vast amounts of cultivable land practically going for pittance. They were not 4 rupees per acre, while the average price of land in Tiruvidampur was 35 rupees per acre. So they suggested that the people who are losing out in Travancore should migrate to Malabar. And you have in this 30s, mostly in 40s and 50s, large number of farmers moving into Malabar and accumulating wealth there. So not losing their status as farmers. They would otherwise lost the social status of being farmers, would have ended up with landless agricultural status. They didn't go down. So the Lenin's prediction that it would happen did not happen. They practically defeated Lenin's prediction by migrating. But migration to that region also resulted in their children being sent to for education, and that to education of the sort that would give you early jobs with higher salaries, particularly nursing, pharmaceuticals, and other things, and going abroad. Now, what has happened is that there is a whole bunch of migrants' children working in all over, I mean, you know it better than me, all over Europe, and there is a flow of money, but this money do not seems to be invested into manufacturing. Why there is no attraction for investment in manufacturing? Because Kerala, as you know, even now has got less than 4% participation in manufacturing, for manufacturing exports. I got the feeling that the advantage that when initially the traders in Kerala got by using, the river, the west-east kind of communication and making money out of trade, rather than having a south-north road network and making more, spending more, having to spend more expenditure in manufacturing, made them vary of investment in manufacturing, but more in trade. And trade is, even now, trade not only in trade in goods, but trade in services seems to be the major preoccupation of Kerala. That could also lead to accumulation, as you were saying, of primitive accumulation. But that seems to be not happening. Why it is not happening? I think it requires much more investigation, and I think it requires much more discussions, than what I can do at this moment. I hope whenever I have to answer somebody like you, it's I am very careful about what I'm trying to say.
So we usually stop our Q&A with those 5 questions, but today we've gone on to 10, and then continue after we cut our live feed. Before we cut our live feed, I'd just like to say a heartfelt thank you to Tharakan sir here, who's come a long way and is going to go back all that way. I don't envy him at all. This is a small token of our appreciation. This is just time pass reading for you, practically. This is something to take him away from his heavy academic work. I just wanted to say, we've been planning to call Tharakan sir here for a while, but haven't got around to it because in our curatorial thread for the Journal Archives, we've only just arrived at this point where we've looked at slavery, we've looked at agriculture, and then now we would like to start cross-referencing these things.